So hello everybody, hello Marcin. Marcin asked me to speak to you about how we use creation of video to help students learn languages. So what I thought I'd do, I'll give you a bit of a tour around some of the things that we're doing, and I'm going to give you a few examples which you can have a look at when you've got time. So a bit of history. The first thing is I never used creation of video in language learning before we had smartphones. So that's the first thing. The technology wasn't available widely, so there was no real means of making that something which was generalized. So the first thing which was important a few years ago, maybe 5 years now, was to experiment with what were the possibilities of smartphones in the classroom. And one of those possibilities, of course, was recording the voice and also recording the video. So over the past few years, I've been experimenting quite a lot with all the different possibilities, and I'm now absolutely convinced that this is an essential tool if it's available to you in your language learning ventures. So let's have a look at some of the examples. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to screen share, and I'm going to talk you through some of the examples of what we can do. Right, so just a moment, I'm going to flick that over. And we're going to have a look at screen share. What happens if I close this? Right, just a moment, I'm almost there. Right, so what you should be able to see now is my YouTube playlists. And if you see at the top, you'll see my name, Simon Ensor, and some playlists. So I'd like to just move down a moment, and we'll have a look at this one. This is an example of student presentations. So I'm going to click on that, and here you have Anthony. Right, I'm just going to stop Anthony a moment. So this is one example of what we're doing. In fact, the most simple example is using video to enable students to do presentations of themselves. And this aspect is, I think, really important because students tend to take a lot of time redoing that video until they're happy with it. And I think that's a really interesting thing to do. And it can be simply a presentation, or it could be something that I'm doing at the moment, which is presenting some idea to other people, in which case it's maybe easier because you don't see the person's face. So that's one very simple example of what we could do with video. And of course, you can just use a smartphone to do that. You don't need a webcam. Let's go back a moment. Okay, another example of using video in the classroom. This is an example from Clavier. So we have, I'm just going to turn off the noise. Right, so we have some students who are Polish students who were asked to make a video to enable students in other places to see what their life was like as a student. And I can hope that you appreciate that this is not just about recording somebody's voice, it's also now becoming something much more creative. So we have the use of the language of video, which I think is something which is increasingly interesting for students. Firstly, from the point of view of understanding how video is used in their lives, the cinematic language, which you can find here, and then actually learning how to put all that together. And I think that that is something which is increasingly necessary for people in all sorts of sectors of employment and on a personal level. So it's not something which is terribly complicated at a simple example, but it's something which I think all students should learn to do, like all students learn how to write an essay. I think this is just as much a language activity as writing an essay for an exam. And I would suggest that that's much more rewarding for them, and they learn much more because they're surrounded by YouTube, they're surrounded by video. So again, you can find more of these videos in the Clavier playlists. So let's come back. Right, another thing that we use video for is to get students to teach others. So I'm going to click on perhaps this one here. So here are some examples of inspiration for me. This is a dancer who learnt to dance using YouTube. And again, YouTube as a means to learn is absolutely fantastic. And I think a lot of our learners, they don't think of YouTube as a place to learn. And I think a lot of teachers don't either. And I think that is a mistake. I think that YouTube is a vast resource of learning resources. Here is an example of a guy who's learning to dance hip-hop, and he did all of that with YouTube. So that was an inspiration for me. It also came from an educator called Alec Kouros, who demonstrated this, and he asks his students to learn something using YouTube, and then they teach other people using YouTube. So that was the inspiration for this activity, which we're doing this year in Clermont-Ferrand. So I'm going to click here. Here are a couple of students who are passionate about paragliding, and they demonstrate their passion with a tutorial video like for the hip hop. And so they are learning language which is interesting for them. They're learning to play with the genre of creating a YouTube tutorial video, and you can see that they're playing around in a way which is, you couldn't see that in a classroom. So I think that's another thing which is really important. We are enabling students to open up spaces, learning spaces, which would never be possible if we simply restrict our learning to the classroom. And you can see that if you go down this list of videos, you can see all sorts of videos which are filmed in all sorts of places. So we're making a connection here between formal and informal learning. This is something which they have to do for their formal learning program, but they are motivated to do something. You can see the time that they must have spent putting this into place, because that's their passion. So they are sharing their passion. So that's something which I think is extraordinarily important. Come back here a moment, and here's another example. Okay, so here is a girl who we discovered was a musician, and a phone in the pocket is something really important, I think, for all teachers. You can capture all sorts of instants in your classroom. So this is a classroom, and here is a student who started singing a song, and she actually turned out to be actually a really good artist. And you can see perhaps the reaction of the people. First they were speaking, and suddenly they shut up. I think that is a moment, a key moment of learning in a classroom, and we've captured it here. So it can be used for sharing that with other people. It could be used for research. There are all sorts of possibilities from a teacher point of view. So let's come back again. Okay, we're going to have a look now at some examples of student video creation. Perhaps going to look at this one first. Okay, so this was the first video project that I did with the class, and it came from a moment during my program where I didn't want to write an exam, and I was looking around for an idea of escaping this writing of exam, and I thought, well, why don't I ask the students to make videos? So they'd already done some work on video gaming, and we'd use video games to talk about various issues, and this one was about, I think it was about earthquakes, and they played the game, and it was all in English. Yeah, there you go. It's Stop Disasters, and you play this game. I have a number of them if you're interested, and they use English, they discuss together, and it's a strategy game where they must take decisions. So this is the tutorial section of their video which they put together for their evaluation. Here they're demonstrating the game, so they had to learn how to use screen capture software. They then had to create a storyboard for their video. They then had to write script. They then had to distribute the roles. So if I move on a bit in this video, you will see that there are different scenes. Here we have a teacher who is giving her opinion about using video games in the classroom. If I move on a bit more, back a bit, another teacher, right, okay, so we have various characters. They're taking on various roles. So again, in terms of naturalness of the language, they have learned their roles sufficiently to be filmed on a video. So again, we have a variety of different situations in just one video. Here we have a news presenter. Here we have a perspective of two kids who have been playing this video game in classroom. So again, we're using a theatrical scenario where there are all sorts of possible languages, language context. It depends really on the imagination of the students. And I think that was, for them, very motivating. They spent a lot of time doing it. Second, they actually learned new skills which they wouldn't have learned if they'd just written an exam paper. They produced something a few years ago which for you now you can study and you can reflect on. There we're moving into a debate, so we have again another form of language being used here. So there are also, in the space of one video, we have a whole selection of competencies, we have a whole selection of contexts, and we have the whole question of motivation. And all of that was shot with a smartphone. So again, this is something which can be built around, become an evaluation, be a project. And I invite you to have a look at the other ones here. And the final one is, which some of you may have already seen. This is a video which starts with a remix of an existing video. So again, another skill which they're learning. And they're going to reflect on the difficulty of teaching in a new context, and in particular, physical education. So I think that video in itself demonstrates all sorts of things which I've been talking about. So if I move on just a little. Okay, so here we have a group of students, so the 4 here, and they have organized a whole group of people in various scenes to film their video. So there's also cooperation, there's organization, there is the question of imagination, creativity, and the English. So it's on top of that, they learned how to subtitle their video. So I think that demonstrates quite a deal of complexity. If I move on a bit, okay, we have all sorts of use of the camera, reflection on point of view, different roles. Here's a teacher in a classroom, so we have a different situation again. We come again. Okay, different teachers, different situations. Okay, sports classes. Okay, this is a real class. The students actually filmed during our class. So here, as you can see, my colleague at the back, and they are actually reflecting on the classroom during the class for their evaluation. So I think that shows all sorts of aspects of how they think about teaching, how they think about learning, how our classroom has been changed. So we see a relationship between a number of spaces. We see a relationship between the use of the technology, which is now available to many of the students. We see a transformation of the evaluation in terms of what we're actually looking for. So we're now looking for different genres, we're looking for different skills, we're looking for the ability to communicate in a wide variety of contexts, taking on different roles. All of this would not be possible, clearly, if you limit yourself to a classroom, if you limit yourself to a teacher-centered classroom, if you limit yourself to books, if you limit yourself to that way of thinking, then I think we're missing an awful lot about what these people, what you, what I can actually do now with all the possibilities that we have. I think what really limits us is imagination. It's much less a question of technology, it's more a question of imagination. So I would invite you to join in the reflection on what we could do with all of this and play, because at the end of the day, none of us are really very clear about what the limits of all of this are, but the opportunities are enormous. I think I'll probably stop with one last example. So I'm going to stop that a moment and I'm going to come back. And we're going to look at Hangouts. So at the moment, I'm in a Hangout. I could be discussing with you at the moment, but I'm using the technology, so the Google Hangout, to do a presentation for you. If we look down here, you will see a conference. This was a conference that I did with Marcin, Marcin did with me, which was a conference in Poland. And if we go down, you will see a whole variety. Ah, yes, this is the one I wanted to look at. This is a class of our teachers, and this is Marcin Kleben, my colleague, who is actually teaching this class with his smartphone in a supermarket. And I think that that says an awful lot about how we can artificially limit ourselves by just thinking about the classroom. So here he is, he's doing his shopping. And at the same time, from time to time, there is my class in France. They are actually being taught by their teacher who is walking around the supermarket. So I think that that says an awful lot about where we can go. Only last week, I had a discussion with 4 friends. One was in Florida, one was in Kentucky, one was in the UK, and there was another one with a smartphone on a beach in Thailand. And so I think that that expresses an awful lot about the new possibilities that we have, thanks to smartphones, thanks to YouTube, thanks to tools like Google Hangouts. And I look forward to hanging out with you when we have a moment. And I hope that you will also investigate those possibilities with your friends, with people that you meet in this community, because I think we have a lot to speak about. So I think that's it. I need to rush off now and speak to Toma, who is also in Poland, if you are watching this from Poland. And thanks very much for listening. Right. Bye-bye, everybody. I'm going to come back, stop the screen share. Stop the screen share. And I'm going to say, thanks for listening. Look forward to working with you. That was fun. That was unscripted. Sorry if it's a bit of a mess. Speak to you soon. I'm going to look at the camera. That's what I tell all my students to do. Bye-bye.